So, if you've ever argued with a radical violent communist online or in person or anywhere, you have probably heard at one point the paradox of tolerance, something that was kind of came up with by philosopher Karl Popper, who originally wrote it in what was the book? The Open Society and Its Enemies. Now, this is something that, again, when it comes to Antifa, when it comes to violence and direct action and fighting the fascists, if you ever challenge them on that, this is something they will cite, saying that you cannot be tolerant towards the intolerant. And they actually have a point, which kind of makes it a bit hard to respond to, because, again, they're actually not wrong when they say that. But I've figured it out. I've been thinking about it for a bit. There's probably a bunch of other responses online, but I'm hopefully going to provide the perfect response here to basically what they say when they say, what about the paradox of tolerance? So to outline exactly what it says, this is the comic I have been sent multiple times by radical communists, saying essentially, should a tolerant society, tolerate intolerance? And it shows a Nazi saying, you want more tolerance, respect my ideas. And the response in the caption is, the answer is no. It's a paradox, but unlimited tolerance can lead to the extinction of tolerance. When we extend tolerance to those who are openly intolerant, such as the Nazis, the intolerant ones end up being destroyed, and tolerance with them. So saying essentially you cannot have a tolerant society, because if you tolerate the intolerant people, they will destroy you, and they will take your place, and now you have an intolerant society. So then it ends with, any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution must be outside of the law. As paradoxical as it may seem, defending tolerance requires to not tolerate the intolerant. Now, again, he's actually not wrong in the way he puts that, but this is a very simplistic view of things. And actually, I just go with the idea of, again, you could go with the libertarian's non-aggression principle, or the general idea of right to self-defense. That really it's down to what Karl Popper is saying is, you can't be a complete pacifist. You can't say violence is bad always, because as soon as violent people show up, you're not going to have any way to defeat them, because you're going to say violence is bad, and they're going to say, I don't care. They're pretty much just going to say, screw you, we are going to destroy you, and there's nothing you can do about it without violating your own principles. So that's why liberal societies generally have the idea of some kind of self-defense. Some kind of, sure, we can use violence in the name of self-defense. And that's where it becomes justified, that violence is bad, except if you're using it to stop violence. In the same way that intolerance is okay, as long as you are intolerant of the intolerant. And again, that makes it a bit more open. That the way of phrasing it as intolerance makes it a bit more open and more interpretable about who you can really fight and when you can fight back. So I've actually been reading through, I haven't read his entire book, but I've glanced through some parts here, and actually I just found on the Wikipedia page, believe it or not, a very good, it gives you everything you need to pretty much address this point. So of course I will link everything in the description here, but I found it interesting that they do cite an actual paragraph from his book right here. This is from note 4 in chapter 7 to volume 1 of The Open Society and Its Enemies. And this is a good point here, actually. Just remember, when you read books that have notes, it's good to read the notes. I do that. I read every single note. Even if it's just a citation, I at least glance at it and acknowledge it's a citation. I read the notes because there's a lot of good stuff in there, especially if you read Walter Block or Hayek or Rothbard, especially Walter Block. Half the book itself is just notations. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. But anyway, in this note here, he really goes into exactly what he means about the paradox of tolerance. So, less well known is the paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance, again, emphasis on the unlimited tolerance, even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. And that's pretty much where people leave it. They don't think any farther. They just say, yeah, you cannot have pure, unlimited intolerance. And that is, in a sense, pacifism. Pure, we will never use violence, ever, even in self-defense. That's what he's critiquing. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies. So again, he's talking about we should not always, there are some circumstances where we cannot just suppress intolerant ideas. It's not always the best idea to stop someone from saying something really awful or preaching intolerance. As long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion, suppression would certainly be unwise. So they're saying basically, or Karl Popper's saying, if you can argue with them, if they're willing to meet you on the debate stage and really discuss ideas, if they're willing to say, sure, I think we should be intolerant of those people, but let's talk about why we should be intolerant, then at the very least, you can use public opinion, you can use reason and logic and debate to beat that person, as long as they are willing to use words to show why to promote their intolerant ideas. You can just use words back. So he's saying it's actually unwise that if someone is preaching hate, it's really unwise to just go and beat him over the head with a bike lock, because that looks bad. For one, that's bad optics. And two, it's not necessarily the right solution to defeating other ideas. Like, why engage in violence when we really don't have to? And especially, it's kind of the thing where once you create the idea that that you can respond to speech with violence, that creates a whole precedent of people responding to speech with violence. So he's saying that, yeah, it's not always the right option. But we should claim the right to suppress them, if necessary, even by force. So again, he's kind of saying, like, you can suppress them, and he's saying force isn't just, like, force and suppression are not the same thing. Force is an extreme version of suppression that he's pointing out. For it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument. So what he's saying is there are some people that aren't willing to meet you in terms of arguments. There are some people out there that aren't willing to actually discuss ideas with you. There are some people that are just like, screw it. When you say something, I'm just going to say, I don't care about your argument. I'm going to respond with violence. But begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. So what Karl Popper is saying is, believe it or not, there are some actual intolerant people out there, and those intolerant people will say, don't listen to your enemies, don't listen to these people, don't listen to their arguments, don't listen to what they have to say, don't respond to what they have to say. It's all trickery. It's witchcraft. They're using they're not actually making good arguments. They're just trying to trick you. Don't listen to them. Instead, use your fists or use violence. Use pistols. He's saying there are people out there that, believe it or not, will say don't listen to arguments. They reject the idea that an argument has any legitimacy. They're saying resort to violence. So he ends with, we should therefore claim in the name of tolerance the right not to tolerate the intolerant. Now there's some very interesting things out there, because he said right off the bat, like, the whole reason we need the right to, or we should reserve the right to be intolerant towards the intolerant, is because some of these people aren't going to use words. They're going to resort to violence. Sometimes, like, sure, if it's words, we can combat that. Even if they're intolerant to ideas, as long as they're willing to come to the table and debate them, we can agree on that manner. We can debunk their arguments and show them wrong. But some people out there, when you say, let's have a debate, they will respond with violence. Where have we seen that before? They will say, believe it or not, they're just going to respond with violence. And those are the enemies of society. Those are the enemies of a tolerant society. So, in fact, it does seem rather strange that if you look at what we're seeing today, and we see the communists, like the groups like Antifa, using violence against people that are saying, let's have a debate, let's have a discussion, let's talk about the ideas. So it says the milkshake things we've seen recently, with people throwing milkshakes, which is actually kind of an interesting idea, because it kind of sounds pathetic to say, like, oh no, I was assaulted, when someone threw a milkshake at you. So it's actually it's in a Machiavellian way, it's actually kind of ingenious that they chose milkshakes, because nobody's on the side of the person throwing bricks. But if someone throws a milkshake, at least they can say, that's funny, and they didn't actually get hurt. So it's just a bit of a side note there. But it is rather interesting just to point out that the people, the communists that say we have to attack these people in the streets, are the ones that Karl Popper would describe as intolerant, are the ones that Karl Popper would say these people need to be destroyed. He would come out against them and say, these people are the problem. These people are causing the bad things. These are the bad people that we need to fight back against. So again, they're using an argument that, if anything, Karl Popper, if he saw them today, he would probably say, yeah, these people, these radical communists, these Antifa people, they need to be destroyed. We need to respond to this intolerant group with intolerance. So that is really what he's saying there. Now, of course, if you bring this up to them, if you responded to them in this way, they would no doubt say, hey, we have, in our defense, we are the ones that are responding with we are the ones that are just responding to the violence, responding to what the communist, or to responding to the fascists. Like, the fascists are the ones shooting up the mosque in Christchurch. They're the ones shooting up the synagogue in Pittsburgh. These are the people being violent. Therefore, we're just responding to that, and that leads to the second problem, because unfortunately there's really two parts to debunking their claim that of the paradox of tolerance. And it is that they're using a very gross generalization of things. It's just the fact that they're simply uninformed. They don't understand what they're talking about. And they're using very collectivist notions of guilt. So, quick run through, like, individualists say that the individual is the moral unit. They're not saying, like, each person is an island, or each person can, each person should be super selfish and that, and, I mean, unless you get into the objectivism stuff, and even then, you have to phrase it in a certain way, because they mean it in a different way than you think they do, probably. But that's a whole other story. But basically, the individual to be an individualist is just to say that the moral unit is the individual. You are responsible for your own actions. There is no such thing as collective shared guilt. You can't say, like, you are guilty because you're a white man, and there's the whole white guilt thing. They can't say that you are at fault because your ancestors 100 years ago did something bad. That is collectivism. That is the idea of collectivism, that a group is the moral unit. That they look at things in terms of groups, that, hey, if this person did something bad, well, this person's in the same group of however I define that group, and therefore they are guilty as well, just by nature of being part of that group. And of course, we're talking about more natural groups again, like someone I can't choose what race I am. Like, I am part of the white group just because that's how I was born. That's my ancestry in that. So it is, like, you can't assign guilt on that way because I did not choose to be part of that. Now, individualism, sure, you can say, like, oh, I am part of Antifa, therefore do I share guilt? Sure, because as an individual, I made that choice to join Antifa, and therefore it's implied that I agree with their positions. So that is not, so there is, in a sense, like, you can assign, like, group guilt if it's based on an individualist sense of people voluntarily joining a certain group and aligning themselves in that way, because you're still judging individual action. But anyways, of course, the issue with attacking, the issue with them trying to justify attacking fascists by attacking centrists and moderate left-wingers and center right-wingers in the streets is they say, well, they're the fascists. Like, these people are fascist. And again, when they say fascist, they pretty much just mean anti-communist, and that's the issue there. It's just that they're flat out wrong, and that's kind of why it's hard to necessarily rebut their claim, because even if you point out that even if you say what I said about the paradox of tolerance, they're still going to say, well, I am responding in self-defense because fascists are shooting up synagogues and mosques, and I'm just responding by fighting back the fascists. But of course, the people they're actually fighting back are, like, instead of fighting back the actual fascists, they attack the centrists, and they're not even smart enough, or they don't care enough to actually figure out that, hey, turns out that the people they're attacking are an entirely different group from the far right, from the people actually shooting up innocent people. These are two entirely different groups, and in fact, you notice the alt-right seems to hate the people that Antifa attacks in the streets quite often. There seems to be a difference there. There seems to be a disconnect there. So, of course, it's kind of like if we were to kind of make gross generalizations in a different way, instead of having two groups, like the communists and the anti-communists, you have three groups. You have the fascists, the communists, and then the moderates. And essentially what's happening is the fascists and communists are fighting back and forth, and they don't really acknowledge that third group of everyone else. So when they fight each other, often they attack the moderates, and the moderates are just like, what are you doing? Like, we haven't done anything wrong. And they're the ones, they're the tolerant group. The moderates are the ones that are tolerant in respect to these other two radical groups. And the communists, when they look at moderates, they see fascists. And I mean, in my experience with the actual extreme right, the extreme right, when they seem to label me as a leftist, so they seem to just define it as us versus them. And of course, if one part of them does something wrong, then it's them who are the enemy, and that's the problem there. It's really that they're making gross generalizations, and they don't even take the time to really understand. And that's not something you can necessarily explain to them in a comments thread on social media or something that you can really explain to them in person and in times that they're willing to listen. It's really down to, if they bring up the paradox of tolerance, you can bring this stuff up, but it might not work, because then you're going to get into a debate of, well, is Tommy Robinson kind of a fascist, or is he only a bit of a fascist, and then that's a whole different thing. And it's because that's what they do. They group the ideologies. Oh, you're anti-immigrant, you're a fascist. All right, and of course, what does anti-immigrant mean? Well, it means, do you oppose mass immigration? Do you oppose open borders? Well, you're anti-immigrant. What does anti-immigrant mean? It means fascist and that kind of thing, where they make all these loose connections, and somehow you can define a rather like centrist moderate position as fascist, because this is related to this, and this is related to this, and this is related to this, and this is related to fascism. And that's essentially how it works. But I wanted to go through this. I hope this was helpful. It was something that I really didn't know how to respond to in an easy way, and I still don't think there's much of an easy way to respond to that. If this person is not operating in good faith, if they're stuck in their own echo chamber, there really is no way out of it. And pretty much, again, if they're stuck in their own echo chamber, or rather, if they're attacking people in the streets, then they're probably in an echo chamber. So, but hopefully this just gives you hopefully this at least gives you the ammunition and the knowledge to know that, hey, when someone says, well, like, Antifa is justified because of the paradox of tolerance, well, actually they're not, because of this very reason. Because Karl Popper, honestly, I think if he were to look at things today, would say, yeah, Antifa is an intolerant group and you should fight back against them. And I don't think they really expected that there. So let me know what you think in the comments section, if you agree, disagree, if you think I misinterpreted this. Again, I have not read all 815 pages of The Open Society and Its Enemies. I've really just skimmed a bit here and there, and it's just, I found the Wikipedia page with this good quote, and that described it rather well, and it's like, oh, that gives you a significant insight into what Karl Popper actually means by tolerant and intolerant, and it does seem to work against the groups like Antifa. Like, Karl Popper does seem to think that pretty much anyone that responds to a request for debate and discussion with violence is the intolerant group. He really did seem to be focusing on like the whole free speech aspect here of the idea that if people are willing to meet you on the debate stage, if people are really willing to discuss their ideas without using violence, then that's something you can. That's probably best left to fighting with words rather than actual violence. But again, like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. It helps me out a lot. Like the video, and thanks for watching.